Okay, so I actually was cut off. I think my last video was too long, so I didn't quite finish Abel's Island chapter 4. So I'm going to pick up where I left off. Abel stood and watched his jacket and the wreck of his ship go the way of the river. Wringing his clothes, he made his way back to the birch, which had become his center of operations. He resented the stream and meant to best it. Abel grimly decided that in his next effort he would not count on a rudder. Rudders were too dependent on the behavior of a wayward water. Nor would he count on a sail because the wind was fickle. He would rely on only the strength of his own two arms. He had seen water striders, those insects that support themselves in swift streams on long legs kept wide apart. He would build a sort of water strider, a catamaran, and row it. He's such an engineer. He plans something and it builds it, and then it doesn't work out, so he revises his ideas, like a lot of you. Excited by this new idea, he quickly put together a catamaran of crisscross sticks in the form of a pyramid, tying the sticks together wherever they crossed. Next, using that remarkable newly discovered tool, his rodent teeth. I think they're trying to be funny because, of course, it's not a new tool. And I'm going to stop interrupting my reading, but these are things that are going through my head as I'm reading, and I'm excited to share them with you. His rodent teeth, he made 2 long oars, or sweeps, which he placed in notches he had gnawed out for oarlocks. In a sporting spirit, he tied his handkerchief to the top of a pole as a pennant. Convinced he had finally solved the problem of conquering the stream, he launched his craft and climbed into the captain's seat with his oars. The moment they touched the water, they were wrenched from his grasp, and the river took over once more. Once more he foundered on a rock, and once more barely managed to scramble back up on the island. He was beginning to feel he owed his wife and the whole world an explanation. He wished he could let them all know what was delaying him. That's the end of chapter 4, but since it was a short chapter, I think it was just a short installment, I think I'll continue with chapter 5. But I'm wondering, what do you think Abel is feeling right now? It seems like he's been extremely persistent and hopeful and clever and thinking of different ideas. What should he do next? What would you do? I'm also thinking that it'd be kind of neat to try to build something like what he was trying to build. A catamaran of crisscross sticks in the form of a pyramid, tying the sticks together wherever they crossed. So he's kind of got like 2 different sides and then sticks that are crossing on top. You could try to build something like that and float it in your sink or your bath. Okay, chapter 5. He sat on a stone, staining it with his wetness. He pulled at his snout and chewed his lips. He was beginning to comprehend the awkwardness of his position. He was marooned on an island, nowhere near civilization as far as he could tell, and if he was going to get off, it must be by his own devices. But he was obviously not going to cross that river in any boat he could put together out of the available materials. He had worked so quickly that it was still only mid-afternoon. He returned to the birch, thoughtfully munching on mushrooms along the way. He knew which ones were safe. He had studied mushrooms in Souris's Botany at home. It must be a book. And he and Amanda had picked them in the forest. He was hungrier than he had realized. Abel posed this question to himself. Other than by swimming or on boats, how do rivers get crossed? By tunnels and bridges, of course. Could he tunnel under that river with his paws, his penknife, and a homemade wooden shovel, perhaps? No pickaxe, no crowbar, no wheelbarrow or wagon, not even a pail to carry out the earth and rocks. He would have to start far back from the shore, so as not to have to carry the diggings out of too vertical a shaft, and he would have to burrow way down deep where it was almost as hard as rock, if indeed it wasn't rock itself. And how could he be sure he was tunneling well under the riverbed? What if the river flooded his tunnel, or if the tunnel simply collapsed on him? What a way that would be for the descendant of an ancient and noble family to die, pressed out of existence in mundane mud, and no one even knowing what had happened to him or where. Only he himself would know. And just for a second at that, the tunnel idea was out. He would have to construct a bridge of some sort. He was intelligent and had imagination. Something would surely occur to him. The situation was by no means hopeless. However, he was clearly not leaving the island that day. He decided to explore it. His birch was situated near the upper end, which he had already hastily crossed. He now carefully walked its length. It was a typical piece of the temperate zone, with familiar kinds of rocks, trees, bushes, brambles, grass, and other plants. It was gravelly near the water, rockiest at the lower end, and from a mouse's point of view, hilly. Abel estimated the island to be about 12,000 taels long, 5,000 wide. What most felt like home on this strange place, full of familiar objects, was the birch. He had already slept in it twice. Returning there, he heard birdsong and saw birds, but they showed no interest in him, and he felt no hope of communicating with them. They were wild, and he civilized. He knew that certain pigeons could be taught to carry messages. He had heard the woeful sounds of a mourning dove, but that was the wrong kind of pigeon. Though he was having a most extraordinary experience, Abel was bored. It was not an adventure of his choosing. It was being foisted on him, and that he resented. He even began to dislike his friends back home for lacking the powers of logic to puzzle out where he was so that they could come to his rescue. He wished to be in his own home with his loving wife, surrounded by the books he liked to browse in, by his paintings and his elegant possessions, dressed in neat, modish clothes, comfortable in a stuffed chair. He wouldn't even mind being bored there, staring at the patterns in the wallpaper. He was fed up with this stupid, pointless island. But the stupid island was where he was going to spend this night at least, in soiled clothes that were beginning to smell fusty. What if he had to stay longer than this night? Food would be no problem. The island abounded with edible plants, many of which he recognized from illustrations in his encyclopedia. And there were insects he could eat if it came to a choice of that or starving. He could continue to sleep in the birch, where, if not completely protected, he had the advantage of a high redoubt, the upper hand in case of a conflict. For dinner he ate wild carrots, carefully scraped with his knife. Then, with his paws folded across his belly, where the nourishment was being extracted from the carrots, he sat under his birch in the opal glow of the waning day and took stock of his resources. He had a shirt, trousers, socks, shoes, underwear, a necktie, and suspenders. The suspenders they're like these things that people use instead of belts. There's one on each side and they connect to your pants to hold your pants up. Sometimes people call them braces. His jacket had gone with the smashed sailboat, his handkerchief with a catamaran. In his pockets he had the stub of a pencil, a small scratch pad, quite damp, a few coins, the keys to his house, and his penknife. And of course there was Amanda's scarf. He pressed it to his face. In spite of all the washings it had been through, its thread still held Amanda's dear scent. Abel fought off a wave of self-pity. Only when he considered the unhappiness he was causing Amanda, his family, his friends, did he finally allow himself some hot tears. Despair was darkening his spirit. Deep down, where truth dwells, he wasn't at all sure he'd be getting off the island soon. He rested against his tree and gazed at the river just being itself, burbling along. The river was where it ought to be. Abel wasn't. He felt out of place. When it grew dark, he climbed to the top of his tree and lay down in the crook of a branch, hugging Amanda's scarf. He was suddenly thrilled to see his private personal star arise in the east. This was a particular star his nanny had chosen for him when he was a child. As a child, he would sometimes talk to this star, but only when he was his most serious, real self, and not being any sort of a show-off or clown. As he grew up, the practice had somehow worn off. He looked up at his old friend as if to say, "You see my predicament." The star seemed to respond, "I see." Abel next put the question, "What shall I do?" The star seemed to answer, "You will do what you will do." For some reason, this reply strengthened Abel's belief in himself. Sleep gently enfolded him. The constellations proceeded across the hushed heavens as if tiptoeing past the dreaming mouse on his high branch. Abel dreamed of Amanda, odd, unfinished dreams. As the new day dawned, he dreamed he was falling. There was nothing to get hold of in the awesome void, and he plummeted toward unthinkable pain on the hard ground. Was he really dreaming? Yes, but he was also really falling. Dream and reality were the same. He hit a leafy branch which broke his fall, and he landed in deep grass and was awake. It sickened him to see the river in the pale, early light. Wow, his feelings have really changed. He keeps realizing the gravity of the situation. How do you think you would be feeling if you were Abel?